Jungle. Audio 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 Jungle.
The wise Buddha supposedly once said, "After enlightenment, the laundry." Maybe, and I don't know if that quote is true, but what I do know is that nobody likes doing the laundry, especially Henry here.
Audio Jungle.
While the labor of it is a chore, the techniques of the whole process have always confounded him. Water temperatures, what colors to separate, when and when not to use bleach. However, Henry's real struggles with laundry have nothing to do with ironing or fabric softeners. He has a hard time finishing things. It doesn't matter what it is. As soon as he nears the end or the last of something, a sickness wells up in the pit of his stomach, and he can't go on. Hell, his wife won't even go to the movies with him much anymore, being he has to escape down the aisle long before the credits roll. Henry would be lucky if he could even get through this load of laundry. He wishes he could turn it off or push on through, but his distress goes beyond just putting away that one remaining bowl from the dishwasher.
Audio Jungle.
Henry could talk to a therapist about his condition, but the origin of his unease has always been staring him straight in the face. See, Henry's trepidation comes from the biggest ending of them all, the apocalypse. You know, Armageddon, the end of days, Revelation, call it what you will. Sure, everyone may think of the end of the world from time to time. It's human nature. And with today's news cycle, how could you not? But for Henry, that dark narrative is always on repeat in his brain, and he can't seem to turn it off. This fear that the world, at any moment, could come collapsing down around him has crippled him his whole life. So, to battle this anxiety, Henry becomes a bit of a connoisseur on the apocalypse, a sommelier on the variety of ways it could all fall apart. News articles, books, scholarly journals, anything in the hope that knowledge will help ease his trepidation.
The belief that the world is coming to a final conclusion is a massive subject throughout history. Since humans have walked upright, we've thought about what the end of all of this might be, and nearly every culture and generation has done the same. The study of this concept, known as eschatology, explores perspectives ranging from deeply religious beliefs to purely scientific and secular philosophies. And while the subject is expansive and can mean many different things, we can start to understand it all by asking what, when, who, why, and how.
First, what does the end of the world even mean? Is it the termination of humanity? The end of all life on Earth? Or the destruction of the entire planet itself? Is it the collapse of society? Or some type of spiritual rebirth for the human race?
When will the end happen? Does it happen over a long period of time? Weeks, years, decades? Or will it be a quick flash and it's all over? Or are we living in the end of times right now?
How will this great event take place? Is it from war, famine, plague, or some great cosmic event?
Who is telling us the world will end? A prophet? An oracle of some type? Is this outlook rooted in spiritual belief or scientific research?
Why is the world coming to a conclusion? Is it due to humanity's sins, our pride, greed, and decadence?
Is it by our own destructive hands, or that of an avenging deity?
Or is it simply the random chaos of the natural world?
Yet to begin the conversation about the end of the world, we need to start at the beginning.
Humans are drawn to stories with beginnings and endings, and we inherently want to know our own story. We are all born in the middle of time. From this, we look to the past and future. Nearly every culture and religion has formed stories of how the earth and humanity were born. Even before we learn about science and the Big Bang, most of us hear a different story of the beginning of the world. Along with creation myths, most cultures and religions have stories about how the world will end. These stories are meant to cement us in time by telling us what came before and where we are going, while all distinct, unifying themes of the sin of man, war, natural destruction, and judgment run through them all. The ancient Aztecs believed the rising and falling of the sun was a battle of gods. Constant rituals and human sacrifices were performed to provide the sun god with a sizable army to prevent eternal night. Ragnarok in Norse mythology is the world thrown into chaos with a great battle between the gods and giants. With a catastrophic series of natural disasters, these events will culminate in the submersion of the world underwater. After these events, the world will rise again, cleansed and fertile. The Hopi believe that humanity will reach a pivotal threshold at which we must choose between self-destruction or love and peace. If the wrong path is chosen, a spirit called the Spider Woman will appear and weave a web across the landscape, signifying that the end is at hand.
Everything does have a beginning, even Henry's fear of the end times. He certainly wasn't born with it. Unfortunately, this dread was given to him like an unwanted gift. Like most of us, Henry had no choice and was raised in the same religious faith as his parents. Then again, what 10-year-old child has any idea about monotheistic belief systems other than the one they're put in front of? While the archaic rituals of the Mass might have turned some kids away, Henry found comfort in it. The smell of burning incense, the cadence of passages read in Latin, he ate it all up. Even the lifeless body affixed to the cross didn't bother him. While he held the ceremony of Mass in high regard, the lecturing and homework of weekly Sunday school swayed too closely to the other 5 days he had to sit in a classroom. For him, it turned the mystical into required reading. This all changed in the 4th grade. The teacher that year, Miss Walton, was younger than any Sunday school teacher Henry had had before, and beautiful. Henry found himself gazing at her differently than he had at other teachers, and his mind began to wander in directions it never had in the past. He thought this must be what it feels like when the Holy Spirit enters your heart. While young Henry was transfixed on her angelic curves, he missed what Miss Walton had scrolled across the board.
Now I saw a horse, sickly green in color. Its rider was named Death, and the netherworld was in his train. These 4 were given authority over 1/4 of the earth, to kill with sword, and famine, and plague, and the wild beasts of the earth. When the lamb broke
The first time Henry heard those words, he didn't know what to make of them. It sounded like Miss Walton was mistakenly reading some cheap Dungeons and Dragons knockoff instead of Holy Scripture.
I watched as he opened the 6th seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black, like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars of heaven fell unto the earth.
Miss Walton explained that the book of Revelation told of how God would destroy the world with wars, plagues, and famine. Terrifying natural disasters would ravage every corner of the earth because man had chosen a path of sin over faith. Riders on horseback spreading death, angels pouring out bowls of pain, rivers of blood. This was not like the usual love and forgiveness stuff Henry had heard at Sunday school. Ms. Walton gravely stated that while other books in the Bible described past events, this one spoke of the present. Henry hung on to every word that Miss Walton spoke, despite feeling paralyzed by them. She promised the class that this was happening now, and they would be the generation to witness the end of the world, the apocalypse. After hearing those words, Henry refused to go to school or church. Instead, he lay in bed looking for signs of the end. What truly terrified young Henry wasn't the damnation of his soul or even the world perishing in fire, but that his own sin, his carnal thoughts about Miss Walton, would bring on the end of the world.
Nearly all religions have their interpretation of the end of the world, but it is the book of Revelation within the Christian belief that has permeated Western culture more than any other story. The book's history is as long and complicated as its writing is dense. Some faiths disregard it as blasphemy, while other Christian faiths embrace it fully, even spawning several denominations, such as Seventh-day Adventists and the Jehovah's Witnesses. While it was accepted earlier among some Christians, it would take several centuries to officially be canonized into the New Testament of the Catholic faith. Scholars, theologians, and believers have pored over its dramatic phrasing for centuries, and from that have come endless interpretations.
Historically, little is known about the authorship of the book. For many centuries, the book was attributed to St. John the Divine, an apostle of Jesus and author of one of the 4 Gospels. Modern scholarly research points to another John, who was exiled to the island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea, sometime in the late 1st century CE. While in seclusion, he claims to have been taken by a great vision. A divine being, thought to be Jesus, appeared before John and told him of what was going to come to pass. God would destroy the world so he could build a new Jerusalem. Writing in Greek, John clumsily scrawled down his vision and sent it out to the 7 churches of Asia Minor. Over time, his account became known as the Apocalypse, which originates from the Greek word apocalypsis, meaning unveiling and hence revelation. And that's what this book is about, the revealing of God's plan for the world and his people. John's text draws from the traditional revelatory writings of the Old Testament, particularly the books of Daniel, Ezekiel, and Isaiah. But what separates John's writings from his predecessors is its vivid language, lengthy detail, and the abundant use of numerology.
And between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders, I saw a lamb standing, as though it had been slain, with 7 horns and with 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth.
Because of the book of Revelation's grandiose and extravagant writing, summarizing it is challenging, but it plays out in a series of visions and nightmares. After being shown heaven, John describes a scroll with 7 seals, which can only be opened by the Lamb of God. Within the scroll is God's plan on how he will end the world. As the first 4 seals are opened, 4 horsemen appear to destroy the world through war, famine, pestilence, and death. And while God releases angels to save 144,000 of the faithful from his destruction, he also summons 7 angels, each one carrying a trumpet. The blowing of these trumpets announces such physical catastrophes as the coming of a great earthquake, the turning of rivers into blood, the falling of stars from heaven, and the darkening of the sun and the moon.
A battle between good and evil in heaven begins with the devil in the form of a red dragon against the archangel Michael, leading the angels of God. Emerging from the sea will be an evil beast with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns on his heads. The beast, carrying the number 666, influences and leads humanity away from God. The angels are then given 7 bowls of God's wrath to pour over the earth and further decimate humanity.
The 5th angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and its kingdom was plunged into darkness. People gnawed their tongues in agony and cursed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, but they refused to repent of what they had done.
After time, the beast is cast into the lake of fire, and the dragon is imprisoned in the bottomless pit, with Christ reigning for 1,000 years. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and to gather them for battle. God then triumphs, destroying the devil and all evil. A last judgment will be made by God for all souls of the earth, and a new heaven and earth will replace the old.
Throughout history, the book of Revelation has inspired many predictions about when the apocalypse will occur. 4th century French bishop Martin of Tours predicted that the Antichrist would come to power in his lifetime and that the world would end before 400 AD. Melchior Hoffman and his followers believed Christ's second coming would take place in 1533 and that Strasbourg, Germany would become New Jerusalem. Florence Houteff, a self-proclaimed prophet of the Branch Davidians, predicted that the apocalypse would occur on April 22, 1959. This same doomsday religious sect would later reach infamy through cleric David Koresh and the tragic incident in April 1993.
For some, the book of Revelation isn't the only chapter predicting the end of days. There's a continuing belief that the Bible is not just a collection of stories, but a book of coded verses, hidden algorithms and intricate enigmas to be translated into a map of the future. Joachim of Fiore, a 13th century Italian priest, calculated from the Old Testament that the time after Christ was divided into 3 stages. He believed the beginning of the 3rd stage and the apocalypse would begin in 1260. Through a series of complex mathematical calculations from Holy Scripture, William Miller devised that the end times would come on March 21st, 1843. As the day approached, many of his 100,000 followers, known as Millerites, sold all of their belongings, stood on the roof of their homes, and waited for the rapture. Of course, it didn't happen and became known as the Great Disappointment.
Yet many Christians genuinely believe that the words in that book foreshadowed our current world. From their perspective, contemporary events can be seen as laying the groundwork for the apocalypse and Christ's second coming. The war of Gog and Magog has been read as that between Russia and Israel, and the unification of Europe as the 10-horned beast. But the most dominant sign for many has been the reunification of Israel in 1948. To add to this, Israel would even go on to capture Jerusalem, along with many other territories during the Six-Day War in 1967. According to Scripture, the Jewish temple must be rebuilt in Jerusalem on the current site of the Temple Mount for the prophecy to be fulfilled. This return of the Jewish state is seen by many as a divine act, starting the prophetic clock and counting down to the last days, fueling the conviction that we may witness revelation in our lifetime.
Every child has some place they go to escape the world, a place secluded from the pressures of growing up. Henry would spend hours wandering under the canopy of trees in the forest and never feel threatened or alone. The silence of those oaks and maples comforted him in a way he couldn't find in the hallways of school or the playing fields of sports. What truly brought peace to his fraught mind was camping with the Scouts. From sunup to sunset, he and his friends spent hours exploring trails, learning about the natural world and how to survive outdoors. Those days together felt endless. They were some of the best times of his life. The only part that Henry begrudgingly tolerated was the horror stories his fellow Scouts told around the campfire. The story of Bloody Mary, the Hook, and crazed Sasquatch tales. It was on one of those trips that Mike Saluki told the oddest opening for a scary story.
Did you know in 20 years, the entire world is going to be underwater?
Henry and the other Scouts looked back at him with blank stares of confusion. It was a shit story, but it was the way Mike said it that caught Henry off guard. There was a tinge of real fear in his voice. Mike darkly explained that Antarctica was thawing because dangerous solar radiation was coming in through a hole in the ozone layer. Caused by man-made chemicals released into the atmosphere, the opening was the size of a continent and slowly expanding. Entire cities would be washed away by the rising tides, he said, flooding most of the Earth by 2020. That numbing feeling Henry had first felt in Sunday school began to creep under his skin. God had destroyed the world once with floods, he thought. Was he about to do it again? Yet, this future was not foretold by some ancient text, but by the research and study of living scientists. He couldn't understand how this could be happening to the planet. It certainly wasn't done by 14-year-olds like he and his friends. Did all the world's adults forget what they read in the Scout Handbook? To Henry, the once brilliant, still night sky appeared like a dark, suffocating blanket. The trees now felt like harbingers of doom rather than confines of tranquility.
There probably isn't a person on the planet who's unaware of the environmental crisis humanity faces today. It's no secret that the challenge of our declining ecosystem is one of the most threatening and complicated scenarios society has faced. But how did we get here? How did we begin this? What some call an ecological apocalypse for humanity. Humans are relatively fragile creatures, only able to live in a very limited degree of temperatures and conditions. Because of this, weather and nature have always controlled our lives. It tells us where we can live, what we can eat, when we need shelter.
While the environment is essential for our survival, it is often trying to kill us, and its life-altering forces make it humanity's closest tie to the apocalypse. This destruction could come from weather, geological disruptions, or disease.
Early humanity understood that the forces of nature needed to be respected and even feared, as they could bring civilizations to an end. In 79 CE, humanity witnessed one of the most explosive scenes of volcanic activity ever recorded. Mount Vesuvius off the southern coast of Italy suddenly erupted. The volcano sent ash, stone, and gases, spewing some 21 miles into the air. When it was all said and done, over 2,000 people lost their lives, and it left the Roman cities of Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Atlantis buried under ash. Because the eruption was so sudden and violent, this event has cemented itself in our collective memory as an example of nature's almost uncontrollable power over humanity.
Like the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, there have been many catastrophic ecological events throughout history. 14th century Europe was devastated by both weather and biological apocalyptic disasters. The Great Famine from 1315 to 1317 was brought on by massive rains, which caused widespread starvation and disease, and even led to cannibalism in some areas. This was followed by the Black Death in 1346, possibly the greatest end-of-the-world scenario to hit humanity. Carried through the fleas on rats, this bubonic plague took the lives of an estimated 50 million people across the continent. That's 50% of the population of Europe wiped out in just 4 years.
Due to nature's deadly threats, humanity has always sought to protect itself, building stronger shelters, developing effective medicine, ensuring better food supply, and enhancing energy production for heat and light.
The presence of humanity has always changed and altered nature, ever since we started planting and plowing the land. But the real issue comes with how humanity's relationship with nature has changed. We haven't always looked at the environment in the same way. Before the 17th century, humanity saw nature as a means of survival, both a blessing and at times a curse. At the dawn of the Enlightenment period in Western culture, nature was re-envisioned as dead matter, abiding by a set of mechanical but unknown laws which could be discovered and mastered through careful study and observation under controlled circumstances.
Philosopher Francis Bacon believed that humankind was distinct from the natural world and that we could treat it as our servant or slave. René Descartes would go on to say that humanity has the potential to be the master and possessor of nature.
But this concept of humanity ruling over nature can be seen as far back as the Bible. In the book of Genesis, there is the command by God that man will subdue the earth and have dominion over it. Since the Industrial Revolution, humanity has been about reducing risk and predicting the outcome of weather and nature. We sought to control the story, build a safer, more comfortable narrative for humanity, and increase the standard of living on the planet.
As we use technology to defend ourselves from the threat of natural elements, we inadvertently created new ones. They became widely recognized by the public during the 1970s and 1980s.
Because of the continuous air pollution being dumped into the atmosphere, there were fears of acid rain causing acid deposition in streams and rivers, making them uninhabitable for many species. Issues surrounding the toxic waste produced from factories, manufacturing plants, and industrial slaughterhouses came to the forefront, along with the pesticides used on the plants and vegetables we consume.
The most significant threat to humanity has been what we now call global warming, the ongoing increase in average global temperature caused by man-made greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide. For decades, the UN and many climate scientists have warned society that a 2-degree Celsius increase in global temperatures would be the threshold for catastrophe, or what climatologist and geophysicist Michael Mann calls the tipping point.
As a result, we find that heat waves are becoming more common globally. Amplified warming in the Arctic has contributed to thawing permafrost, glaciers, and a declining sea ice. This causes warming and rising of the oceans. Each instance creates what is known as a feedback loop, where an alteration caused by climate change can initiate a process that leads to further warming, which subsequently deepens the initial alteration.
The impact of this ecological change has brought on catastrophic disasters and extreme weather events. In 2011, a drought and famine in Somalia, worsened by higher sea temperatures, resulted in an estimated 250,000 deaths. 53,000 died from a heat wave in Europe in 2022, with another 37,000 the following year. Australia experienced its worst bushfire season in 2020, fueled by the hottest year on record. The fires consumed 24 million acres, killed over 1 billion native animals, and severely impacted some species and ecosystems. Multiple Category 5 typhoons in 2023, with winds up to 175 miles per hour, struck the Pacific, causing over $4 billion in damages across the Philippines, Japan, Taiwan, and Guam.
While we are fully aware of these threats, there has been very little action taken to curb humanity's CO2 emissions output. And now it is said that an increase of 3 or 4 degrees is likely by the year 2100.
With each environmental threat comes a new level of survival challenges for humanity. While some areas may suffer drought from rising temperatures, others could see monsoons of massive rainfall, both of which would lower food and water supplies. Poorer countries and those closer to the equator would struggle to survive, pushing the population to more hospitable areas of the globe. The UN estimates there may be up to 200 million climate refugees by 2050. The overcrowding in city centers could spread new diseases far worse than COVID-19 pandemic of 2020. So you would start to see a domino effect of society falling apart. In this case, an end-of-the-world scenario would not be immediate, but a slow, decade-long or centuries-long occurrence, with human suffering and strife like the world has never seen.
A clear example of this breakdown can be observed in the 2003 Darfur conflict in Sudan. The war stemmed from climate change-related disasters, desertification of the area, with the Sahara Desert advancing southward by nearly a mile each year, and a decrease in annual median rainfall of 15 to 30%. This led to conflicts between nomadic herders and settled farmers over access to land and water. A gradual decline in natural resources undermined the peaceful coexistence of the two major ethnic groups in the area. The conflict resulted in thousands of deaths from war and famine and millions of displaced individuals. Now imagine this, multiplied by 1,000, and you have a global apocalypse.
From many climate scientists' perspective, humanity is too late in addressing this problem and faces a daunting future on this planet. But all of our worrying about the environment may not matter. There's always the possibility of life-ending meteorites hitting the planet, like those that caused the mass extinction of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. On an annual basis, the Earth is pelted with foreign objects from space. Most do nothing or burn up in the atmosphere. However, in 1908, an asteroid exploded above eastern Siberia near the Tunguska River, flattening 80 million trees over an area of 830 square miles. NASA does have the Planetary Defense Coordination Office, which tracks asteroids and comets that could pose a hazard to Earth. But we have little defense against these foreign objects. Currently, there is little we can do to prevent a meteorite from again destroying all life on the planet.
A meteor hitting the Earth or not, Henry's future didn't look pleasant, and nature didn't seem so gentle. While an environmental apocalypse might not wipe out the entire human race, survival would be left to the fittest. Would Henry have to use those skills he learned to earn merit badges to keep himself and his family alive? Would he have to walk miles for fresh water or scavenge for food? Would he have to join a roaming pack of savage marauders? Henry didn't go into the forest much after that. For the most part, spent the better part of his teenage years inside, trying to bury his childhood anxieties. But some things are easier said than done.
What plans have you got, Colonel?
And it was one Saturday afternoon, while surfing for cartoons, he came across something outside his regularly scheduled programming. the documentary chronicled the life of Michel de Nostradamus, a 14th century French astrologer who claimed he could see into the future. Starting with the predictions of the French Revolution, the documentary showed how Nostradamus would foresee the forming of the United States, World War II, and even the assassination of JFK. Hosted by the great Orson Welles, the late director pontificated on the weight of these prophecies in his infamous baritone voice.
Was he a quack, a charlatan, or somebody who could see what others could not see?
It all seemed fascinating to young Henry, but then the documentary took a turn.
Before continuing, let me warn you now that the predictions of the future are not at all comforting.
With the return of Halley's Comet in 1986, Nostradamus predicted a great drought with widespread famine that would lead to cannibalism. These events would be followed by a great earthquake and floods devastating the world. But by far the most horrifying prediction to Henry was the rise of the third Antichrist, a great military leader from the Middle East, who would form an alliance with the Soviet Union. Together, they would wage a 27-year conflict, World War III. The first major strike was a missile attack on New York City. Millions would die, and the city would be turned to dust. Those ghastly predictions of Nostradamus burned in Henry's young mind. This was all to begin in the year Henry was to start high school, just 11 years away. While punishing angels or the return of the Almighty might not be part of his future, calamity and death still seemed to be on the schedule.
Most of us probably know the name Nostradamus from the tabloids we've seen while standing in line at the grocery store, or as that crazy old wizard who gets mentioned every time a disaster happens. It's easy to dismiss him. But even after 300 years, that French astrologer who claimed to be able to see into the future is still in our cultural psyche. Michel de Nostradamus was born in 1503 in Saint-Rémy de Provence, France, to a rather normal upbringing. He began his professional career as an apothecary, attempted a university education several times, and eventually became a kind of physician, helping those suffering from the plague.
This led him to travel throughout Europe, practicing medicine, and he was reportedly quite good at it. He'd even go on to write what we might call a cookbook for home medicine. But the manuscript also contains a range of other concoctions such as marmalade recipes and hair dye formulas and even a love potion. But this virtuous pursuit eventually bored Nostradamus. He drifted into the occult, astrology, the art of prediction.
This career change may seem radical, but astrology was part of medical education at that time. Also, Nostradamus' connection with psychic premonitions is said to have started as far back as his childhood. Rumor has it that one of his earliest experiences involved witnessing a Franciscan friar entering a small courtyard and going to a well for a drink. Nostradamus approached the friar, knelt down, and kissed the hem of his robe. When asked why he honored the friar in such a way, he replied, "I must honor His Holiness the Pope." The young friar from that courtyard, Felice Peretti, ascended to the papacy as Sixtus V.
Nostradamus started out by writing annual almanacs. These small publications contained predictions, calendars, and horoscope information, and were a popular trend at the time. But Nostradamus' crowning work of his career was the Prophecies, originally printed in 1555. It is made of 7 chapters, or centuries, each containing 100 verses of coded predictions. He wrote his predictions in a poetic 4-line verse known as quatrains, obscuring their meaning by combining French, Greek, and Latin. This was done to partly obscure his predictions from religious persecution, as the occult was considered heresy in that period. Nostradamus always had his detractors throughout history, yet in his own time, his predictions held a serious place among royalty and the general public of Europe, including personally advising Catherine de' Medici, wife to King Henry II of France. Since its first publication, The Prophecies has been printed again and again in every century, translated into numerous languages with an unknown number of interpretations and annotations on what the future holds. But what has captured readers for centuries is his insight into world-changing events. One of Nostradamus' most prolific quatrains points toward the Great Fire of London in 1666.
The blood of the just will be demanded of London, burnt by fire in the year 66. The ancient lady will fall from her high place, and many of the same sect will be killed.
There are also the quatrains foretelling the start of World War II.
From the depths of the west of Europe, a young child will be born of poor people. He who by his tongue will seduce a great troop. His fame will increase toward the realm of the east. Beasts ferocious with hunger will cross the rivers. The greater part of the battlefield will be against Heister. Into a cage of iron will the great one be drawn, when the child of Germany observes nothing.
While his book, The Prophecies, would go on to forecast many historical events that Nostradamus would not witness, his most personal prediction came on July 1st, 1556. That evening, he allegedly told his secretary, Jean de Chavigny, "You will not find me alive at sunrise." The following day, he was reportedly found dead, lying on the floor next to his bed.
Most kids would have forgotten about the documentary on Nostradamus or laughed at the ridiculousness of those predictions. But Henry was never good at letting things go. Maybe he re-watched that documentary to combat the nightmares it gave him, to try to normalize his terrible future. To find the logic behind why he begged his family not to visit New York City on summer vacation. To convince himself there was a rational reason behind his turning down a scholarship to a prestigious Manhattan university. Or perhaps he believed that by watching those scenes over and over, he could alter the course of time and rewrite his catastrophic future. Of course, Henry could not control time or the direction of the world. He could barely survive as a teenager. On a late summer evening in 1991, young Henry found himself grounded for trying to sneak out to see a heavy metal band his mother didn't approve of. She said she found their lyrics profane. Like many mothers of the time, she feared that if her son listened to bands like Megadeth and Iron Maiden, he might run off and join a satanic cult. She seemed to have forgotten that her parents said a similar thing when she brought home Beatles albums. Despite these roadblocks, Henry could almost taste sweet freedom. In a few months, he would turn the golden age of 16 and pursue what every teenager in America yearned for. With that laminated piece of paper, he could go wherever he wanted, listen to any music he liked, and see any movie out there. But fate would have a different plan for Henry.
That was Dark Tomorrow by Warplague from their 4th album. More to come at the top of the hour, but first, here's the news.
Since 4 a.m. this morning, tanks and armoured personnel carriers have been rolling down the main streets of Moscow towards the Kremlin, the first sign of the coup d'etat that removed Mikhail Gorbachev from power.
Henry didn't know what a coup was, but it certainly didn't sound good. The broadcast went on to explain that tanks were standing in front of the Soviet parliament as angry Russian citizens protested the takeover. Not only were there splits in the government, but divides within the military as well. The country seemed to be in utter chaos. Henry began to feel that familiar panic. Was this the beginning of what Nostradamus had predicted? Would this uncertainty welcome in the third Antichrist? Or was this just all a coincidence? While parents seemed more concerned about their sons and daughters becoming followers of Lucifer, a far darker cloud, one to truly be afraid of, continually hung over America.
War and conflict have always brought on fears of the apocalypse. But before the modern era, this was never really a possibility. Yet, beginning with the First World War, we see a new level of destruction and death in mechanized warfare. New technologies such as chemical weapons, the airplane, and the machine gun brought on levels of casualties that the world had never seen. On the first day of the Battle of the Somme, British forces alone sustained 57,000 casualties.
This level of death continued into World War II, which saw the development of the ultimate doomsday weapon in 1945, the atomic bomb.
The purpose of creating and developing this weapon was to outpace the Germans, and if needed, use it to change the course of the war. In August 1945, 2 atomic bombs were dropped on mainland Japan, leading to their surrender. While this action ended the war, people questioned the creation of such a powerful weapon. This was further amplified when the world learned about the over 110,000 civilian deaths resulting from the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It became obvious that we had let a terrible genie out of the bottle. And by 1949, the Soviet Union had acquired its own nuclear weapon technology. This would cement the Cold War's start and initiate an arms race unlike any other in history.
The growing tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union led to unprecedented growth in the manufacturing and deployment of these weapons.
What followed was a race by each country to obtain atomic and strategic dominance. The power of these weapons multiplied, going from atomic to thermonuclear capabilities with the ability to decimate large cities.
In addition, both countries also developed longer-range and more accurate delivery systems that could carry multiple warheads to a target. War on the other side of the globe could now be started with a push of a button.
By the time of the mid-1980s, there were an estimated 60,000 warheads between the United States and the Soviet Union, with the ability to destroy the world 10 times over. This doesn't include the 5 other countries that had begun building their own nuclear arsenal.
What is truly terrifying about these weapons is their ability to deliver death and destruction with power and speed unlike anything the world has ever seen. Missiles launched from silos could reach an opposing country in as little as 30 minutes, while those fired from submarines off a coastline could hit their targets in as quickly as 15.
The power of these weapons is godlike, and the ways they can bring death is unprecedented. Upon impact, a nuclear explosion starts with a fireball at about tens of millions of degrees Celsius, which is hotter than the center of the sun. This thermal flash vaporizes nearly anything at ground zero. Mass fires would follow. A fraction of a second after the initial explosion, the heat from the fireball causes a high-pressure wave to develop and move outward, producing a blast effect. This shock wave levels most buildings and creates high winds, reaching over 300 miles per hour. On top of all this, a cloud of nuclear radiation, gamma rays, and neutrons travels from the hypocenter of the explosion, causing an impact on all life forms.
Astronomer Carl Sagan also developed the concept of nuclear winter during the 1980s. This scenario involved so much ash and dust thrown up into the stratosphere that it would block out the warmth of the sun, thus sending the planet into a new ice age.
Like the multiple ways a nuclear detonation can kill millions, survival after the blast also brings with it several challenges. Suppose one survived the immediate explosion through a fallout shelter or underground bunker. In that case, it may take several days for the radiation to become low enough for even a protected person to venture out. In the months and years that follow, certain regions will remain a no-go zone, saturated with lingering radiation. While the necessities of life, food and clean water, will dwindle significantly, devastated by the blast and the ensuing fallout. Hospitals would be pushed to their breaking point, overflowing with casualties, and would struggle to deliver even the most basic care. Medical personnel become overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the injured. Electricity might not be available. Gasoline would be in limited supply. In this chaotic environment, desperation would breed conflict over essentials and skirmishes over food, water, and other critical supplies. Martial law would be enforced if it could be at all. Society would begin to fray. Then there are the psychological challenges in the aftermath of a nuclear event, of the shock of seeing your world turn to dust and having to learn how to survive in this new, hostile environment.
It is this and other proposed secondary effects that could lead to human extinction.
There's no denying the pure physical power of these weapons and the multiple ways they can bring on mass death. But the nuclear age also has introduced a new level of existential fear. Since their inception, the sheer terrifying absurdity that these weapons could bring on the apocalypse has been directly tied to how the world has dealt with this threat.
The reason for the buildup between the U.S. and the Soviet Union was not just a numbers game, but a psychological move on the part of the United States military since the 1950s. The military's buildup wasn't to win a war, but to keep peace through fear of massive retaliation that would lead to total annihilation of both sides. This strategy of deterrence became known as mutual assured destruction.
While fear may be a good military strategy, it can have an incredibly traumatizing and paralyzing effect on people. These conditions created a cloud of anxiety that hung over America in the 1950s and early 60s, and society became obsessed with the fear of the bomb. Fallout shelters were labeled on buildings. The selling and installation of personal family fallout shelters hit an all-time high. Kids practice duck and cover drills in school.
Here's one good way to protect your eyes and neck in case of a bombing.
The anxiety only increased with situations such as the Cuban Missile Crisis, which brought my generation dangerously close to seeing these weapons used.
This was probably the first time in history that an entire generation thought the world could end in a quick flash, an apocalyptic fear that had the high potential of becoming a reality.
Luckily for Henry, he grew up in the 1980s, when this same fear came back into vogue. And the reality of it was that you didn't have to listen to the radio or pick up a newspaper to hear about the potential for a nuclear holocaust. The fears of nuclear war even made their way into the classroom. Several years prior, a teacher had assigned Henry the post-apocalyptic book Z for Zechariah. Nothing like some light reading to stir up the nightmares. Henry's generation knew fallout shelters and duck and cover drills wouldn't save them. And how did teachers expect him to study when an entire population could be wiped out in the time it takes to watch an episode of Family Ties? It seemed no matter where he went or how fast he drove with a driver's license or not, Henry could not escape the future that lay on the horizon. Everyone has a tipping point, the moment when we finally break. It's hard to know what it'll be until it's right in front of us. For young Henry, this began one night when the world was again set to collapse. December 31st, 1999. The biggest fear of that new year was ominously called Y2K, when computers were expected to reach a critical error due to the date change. Dread of electrical grids being shut down, banks collapsing, and even nuclear missiles accidentally being launched spread. Engineers and programmers rushed to fix the problem, but nobody knew what would happen when the clock struck midnight. The media ran wild with the scare. To Henry, it seemed he couldn't turn on a television or read a magazine without them spreading the fear of this potential collapse. With the coming millennium, new interpretations of Nostradamus' predictions were everywhere. Every week, there was a new headline splayed out on the tabloid newspapers warning about the approaching end. And there was the rattling of the pulpit from evangelical preachers, warning of how the new year might usher in revelation. The Reverend Jerry Falwell even declared that he believed Y2K may be God's instrument to shake the nation before the rapture. He had gone to a party with the wholehearted intention of watching Dick Clark count down the new year like everyone else. Tonight he was going to see the dawn of a new millennium. But while his friends uncorked the champagne at 5 minutes to midnight, Henry felt that familiar anxiety overtake him, and he retreated to the one place he could be alone.
Four, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year!
After Henry heard the countdown and sounds of celebration outside the door, he should have been overjoyed. the world had not come to an end. Instead, his mind drifted towards dark places. Henry was tired of being lied to, of the predictions and the warnings and all of it. He now wanted to see the end of the world. Nuclear war, a global earthquake, some god-crushing humanity. He didn't care. He just wanted it to be over with. If only to justify his years of dread and anxiety. And Henry wasn't alone in this thought.
Some people really want to see the end of this story and have tried to bring it on themselves. Shoko Asahara was the leader of the Japanese cult known as the Aum Shinrikyo, whose beliefs are a combination of Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christian millennialist ideas, along with the writings of Nostradamus. In 1995, after making numerous predictions about the end of the world, he led his followers to attack the Tokyo subway with sarin gas as a way to ignite the apocalypse himself. The Christian Zionist movement, a branch of evangelicalism, is actively using political power to hasten the end times. Central to their belief is the necessity for the complete unification of the State of Israel as described in the Bible. With millions of dollars from supporters, they have lobbied the U.S. government to back Israel's expansion and to fund Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Because Christian Zionists believe that Palestinians should not be on Israeli land, they oppose any peace process between the two groups. However, their beliefs extend beyond the Middle East. They view institutions such as the UN, the IMF, and the World Bank as potential tools for the one nation of the Antichrist. Now, outside of religious or cult beliefs about the apocalypse, there are other perspectives about the world's end. Maybe humanity was built to destroy ourselves, that extinction is part of our evolution. According to the Medea hypothesis, the ruthless competition driven by natural selection ensures that the most successful species dominate their environments to such an extent that they ultimately compromise their own well-being. Paleontologist and environmentalist Tim Flannery says, a species will, if left unchecked, destroy themselves by exploiting their resources to the point of ecosystem collapse. This may be nature's way of getting rid of the problem child that is humanity. You also have Anthropocene anti-humanism, a belief that's emerged in the 21st century. It follows the idea that because of how we are hardwired, humanity should be erased from the planet. If you look at the history of humanity, you'll see that the one thing we are really good at is destruction, whether it is to each other or the natural environment. While our intelligence as a species has allowed us to survive and thrive in nearly every environment on the planet, including space, it has been at the constant exploitation of the Earth and ourselves. Because of this, some see our destruction as a sentence that we deserve, and that we should welcome it. We struggle so much to imagine a world without us in it. The argument is that, think of all the art and beauty that would be lost if humanity was gone, or who will explore the cosmos if not humanity? We see ourselves as a vital or important component to the universe only through our own ego as a species.
Audio Jungle.
It's hard to say how much worse Henry's life might have turned out if he continued to let this fear rule him. The weight of it might have been too unbearable. But as quickly as life can break our spirit, it can subtly reveal that our story is far from over.
Audio Jungle.
As young Henry stood there amongst the cold porcelain, contemplating how he wanted to see it all come crashing down, something caught his eye.
Audio Jungle.
In some ways, the apocalypse has been happening again and again since humanity's earliest days. The concept of the world ending is never one single thing. Looking at the history surrounding eschatology, you see repeated patterns emerge. It twists and morphs through cultures and time, renewing and redefining itself. And the fear we feel today is partly because of this past.
The end of the world narrative in most religions is follow a basic framework. Humanity has become too corrupt and violent. We have reached a level of decadence and sin that we cannot turn back from. And it can only be saved by destroying it all and starting anew.
While this perspective has a long history in religious thinking, secular ideas about the end of days are no different. We, at times, feel disillusioned in our thinking that the progress of science, industry, and technology will save us from each other. Instead of creating the utopia we believed it would, technology has only led us toward new ways of destroying ourselves. Thus, we feel our folly dooms us.
We always think things will get worse before they get better.
Yet no matter what time period you look at, if the threat to humanity is real or not, there is something built into us that makes us contemplate the world coming to an end.
Humanity has always lived in a chaotic and unpredictable world. Because of this, we naturally want to find stability in this disorder. And stories and narratives can help us feel some sort of balance.
As Frank Kermode argued in his book, The Sense of an Ending, humans have a seemingly irresistible urge to impose systems and narratives on time, thinking in terms of the world having one definite history, one goal. As terrifying as the concept may be to some, the apocalyptic narrative to others offers a way to address the anxieties and uncertainties that no matter the chaos and disorder of life, there will be some sort of logical and conclusive finale that sums up our story.
The apocalypse can serve as a fantasy for many people. The downfall of society could lead to a reset for humanity, which can have different meanings depending on one's perspective, whether religious or secular. For those with a spiritual conviction, the apocalypse represents the end of sin, where the faithful are rewarded as the Creator establishes a new paradise for humanity. Conversely, environmentalists might envision a return to primitive ways of living in harmony with nature. A financial collapse could spark the fantasy of eliminating class structures and financial burdens. For anarchists, the destruction of government would pave the way for a chaotic, yet empowering tribal society.
There are also those who see another benefit in considering the end of the world. For some, it demonstrates that there may be no narrative to life at all. Each time they hear someone say the world will collapse, and it doesn't, it reinvigorates them about life's unpredictability.
We laugh at those who predict the future and are wrong because it comforts us that the world is not predictable or set on some narrative path.
Every generation believes that they will witness the end of the world, whether they are religious or not.
One might assume that the end of the world predictions and prophecies from a faith-based perspective are unrelated to the real threats humanity faces today. However, these religious and secular ideas are intertwined and influence each other within our culture.
The idea of the world ending is very flexible and elastic. Whether you're talking about it from a religious or secular perspective, this concept ebbs and flows with our culture, adapting to whatever time or historical situation. It absorbs changing interests and rival apocalypses.
An example of this phenomenon is how some individuals have combined the threats of nuclear war and the environmental crisis in their interpretations of the Bible. Elizabeth Clare Prophet was a spiritual leader who in the 1980s told her followers to move to Montana
and built the biggest bomb shelter ever created because of fear of nuclear war she believed was predicted in the book of Revelation. On the same note, publications and headlines on the environmental crisis will often use bombastic language that reads like verses from the Bible to garner attention. Just as how the world may end adapts and changes with history, so does the conviction of when it will happen. With this, the apocalypse has the incredible power of renewing itself.
Religious groups are a great example of this. Throughout history, people have predicted that the end of the world, and none have come true. Yet, this doesn't seem to sway the faithful. Prophecies that fail are seen as human error, and predictions that come true are from God. If a religious group miscalculates, they make minor adjustments to their belief and often rework it to another date. For example, Harold Camping predicted the world would end on September 6, 1994, but then said he miscalculated, later stating that the true date was May 21, 2011. From their perspective, the failure of the prediction is a confirmation of the belief that their deity spared the earth because they passed the test of faith.
One of the immediate dangers of picking an exact date for the Armageddon is that it leaves very little room for error. Isaac Newton, who dabbled in biblical apocalyptic predictions, was well aware of this folly.
This I mention not to assert when the time of the end shall be, but to put a stop to the rash conjectures of fanciful men who are frequently predicting the time of the end, and by doing so bring the sacred prophecies into discredit as often as their predictions fail.
Yet there's been no shortage of people who have forecasted the end throughout history. While they're separated by hundreds and even thousands of years, we can see similarities in their conviction.
They believe it is their duty to ensure humanity is not deaf to their ominous messages, regardless of the personal cost. People who make these predictions also tend to possess a unique ability to interpret current events and interweave them into historical narratives, shaping a future that resonates with people's fears. Moreover, these predictors are often products of their own changing social environments.
The author of the book of Revelation follows the typical model of those who make such predictions. Like many prophets of his day, John of Patmos was a spiritual commentator and political radical. Though John followed the teachings of Jesus, he was originally Jewish. He lived during the 1st century, a fluctuating period in history during which the Roman Empire sacked Jerusalem and destroyed the Jewish temple. So John was a militant against the Romans and had an axe to grind. As a result, the book of Revelation is full of analogies, symbolism, and metaphors meant to represent the political and social climate of that time.
An example is the beast playing the role of the Roman Empire, with the emperor seen as the Antichrist. The book of Revelation was to be read as a warning to the early Christian churches, bending to the influence and threats of the Roman Empire. John was telling the surrounding churches of Asia to stand up to these opposing forces, to hold on to their beliefs and practices, or God would unleash wrath. The book of Revelation could be seen as a 1st century political allegory, much like Animal Farm was for the 20th century.
Though it may be read as the spiritual struggle of St. John and the early Christians, the book of Revelation has throughout history frequently been interpreted and utilized as a means to instill fear and exert power.
While it was written to draw its readers closer to God, the book has continually been used to fuel numerous other political narratives. Around 1213, Pope Innocent III used apocalyptic theology to rally Europe to launch a 5th crusade to capture Jerusalem. He identified Islam as the reign of the Antichrist, whose defeat would usher in the Second Coming. The Protestant reformer Martin Luther dismissed the book of Revelation until he realized he could use it for political leverage, and then would go on to call Pope Leo X the Antichrist. This kind of reinterpretation continued throughout history, with the Antichrist identified as Peter the Great, Napoleon, and John F. Kennedy.
Strangely enough, many of our associations with the book of Revelation aren't even in the original text itself. In fact, the word Antichrist can't be found anywhere in Revelation. What many Christians view as the rapture, when God will physically lift his followers from earth to heaven before the apocalypse begins, is never mentioned in the writings of St. John, and is a relatively recent doctrine originating from the 1830s.
Yet, it was only in the 19th century that the perspective that the book of Revelation is speaking about future events became popular. To keep their congregations in line, preachers, evangelists, and chaplains worked it into their sermons, pushing the belief that their followers were living in the last days. This conviction forms most of the evangelical beliefs we find today.
For years, Henry clung to a deep anger and resentment regarding the apocalyptic warnings that Miss Walton had shared with him. But he now began to see that she was as much a victim of this dangerous fear as he was. Those frightening misinterpretations had been woefully passed down from one believer to another with little regard for the damage they could do. Henry started to examine his beliefs in everything. Why did he continually think that the world would collapse around him? Why did he take those predictions of Nostradamus that he heard so many years ago to heart? Maybe it was the historical recreations or the persuasive narration, but it all must be true, he thought. Why else would it be on television?
Prophecies, or warnings of the future, can also be purposely confusing or misleading. An author can lead us down a maze of language and verse, appearing to obscure the message for only those who crack the code, when in truth, there is very little there. From this we may read or see things we want to believe. The master of this type of deception has been selling books about his so-called predictions for hundreds of years. For many, the writings of Nostradamus have pointed to a map of the future, but in reality, he may have written the greatest ruse in history.
While there have been millions of interpretations of the prophecies, it's important to note that there are no dates within the quatrains, nor are they in chronological order. They're notoriously vague and obtuse, making comprehension and accuracy difficult. Names and locations are usually veiled in code or rhyme. This is why the quatrains can be molded to fit any time period or event. Nostradamus was also criticized in his own time for his lack of knowledge in astrology, and it's been uncovered by contemporary scholars that he borrowed prophecies from previous authors.
Yet, we keep coming back to Nostradamus' predictions. Why? It may be because the prophecies feed off a basic human desire to know what is beyond our understanding. Much like in the service of religion, we want to know what comes next. Nostradamus' predictions attempt to answer the one thing that all of our present technology cannot uncover: the future. He also knew there was a dollar value in this venture. Nostradamus' book, The Prophecies, sold well in his day, providing him with substantial wealth, and this only grew with every edition he printed.
Since his death, he has become a booming cottage industry. Millions of dollars continue to be spent every year on books, documentaries, trying to unravel his writings.
And nothing much has changed in our modern world. We still seek to forecast the future, and the value of this information has only increased.
The claim to be able to see into the future is a currency unlike any other in our world. Billions are spent every year on predicting the stock market, the spreads on sports teams, or the coming trends in the shopping world. And peddling fear of the end of days has always been big business. Published in 1970, The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey told of the forthcoming collapse of civilization at the turn of the millennium. It would sell over 28 million copies and be turned into a documentary, ironically also narrated by Orson Welles. After its success, Lindsey would continue pumping out fear-mongering throughout the next 2 decades. Predicting the end of days even makes great fiction. You couldn't walk into a bookstore in 1996 and not find a display of the top-selling apocalyptic novel series Left Behind by evangelist Tim LaHaye and author Jerry Lee Jenkins. Luckily, the world didn't, and like in their books, because they were able to profit from 15 sequels, multiple films, and a kids series.
The Man Who Saw Tomorrow was even remade in 1991 to cash in on the Gulf War. Now narrated by Charlton Heston, this new version casts Saddam Hussein as the third Antichrist. And just because you preach it doesn't mean you have to believe it. When asked about narrating the Nostradamus documentary, Orson Welles said he didn't believe any of it. He just did it for the cash.
The news of the coming apocalypse can bring on a landslide of emotional responses: fear, anxiety, or fight or flight. Emotion can be more powerful than logic. It can cloud our judgment, blur the lines between fact and fiction. While warnings of Armageddon are intended to save society, proclaiming doom, whether from a belief system or a scientific perspective, can have devastating effects on the world.
During his time in the Oval Office, it was no secret that Ronald Reagan was a faithful servant of Christianity, and religious convictions were crucial to his understanding of the world and performance as president. Earlier in his term, there were real concerns that Reagan may fall victim to historical fatalism, that it was his duty to set the wheels of the apocalypse in motion.
Do you ever get the feeling sometimes that if we don't do it now, if we let this be another Sodom and Gomorrah, that maybe we might be the generation that sees Armageddon?
Yes. Reagan would go on to exaggerate the threat of the Soviets to the American people, calling them an evil empire. With the public all in a frenzy, he pushed the Space Defense Initiative, commonly known as the Star Wars program, through Congress. This concept of putting defensive and offensive weapon system in space was deemed by many ludicrous, not only from a technological point of view, but also as a strategic decision.
In the 1970s, there was a real concern about overpopulation and that the planet could not sustain us if we continued at this rate.
While overpopulation theories and models have been around since the 19th century, mainly by economist Thomas Robert Malthus, the source of this fear in the 20th century stems from the 1968 book, The Population Bomb, by Stanford University entomologist Paul Ehrlich. The book echoed such dire warnings as hundreds of millions of people are going to starve to death, and nothing can prevent a substantial increase in the world death rate.
The result of this book was a worldwide fear that caused countries such as India to issue sterilization programs, and China its one-child policy.
The outcomes of these programs had devastating effects on the population of these countries, leading to a shrinking workforce, economic strain, and violations of human rights. This was particularly evident among marginalized and impoverished communities, which faced coercion into abortions and sterilization procedures.
While scientists may run various models on the potential direction of the environment, the challenge with making any prediction is that science is constantly evolving. The circumstances around those conditions continue to fluctuate, and sometimes the science is conflicting.
Where Ehrlich went wrong in his book was by mistaking population numbers in contrast to the impact people have on their environment. He also failed to consider growing technology in food production. Farmers developed and adopted new agricultural techniques, such as improved seeds, high-intensity fertilizers, and drip irrigation.
Bad news sells, and this has long been the mantra for the media. Stories on climate change are no different. News outlets have never been afraid of using dramatic and sensationalizing headlines to grab people's attention.
The signs are all there, with fires raging around the world, in Greece and Turkey and in California.
It is much easier to get a spot on the 10 o'clock news and grab people's attention if you say the Earth will expire in 10 years rather than 400. Facts and logical steps are lost to emotion and fear.
Climate doomsayers may just be as damaging as climate denialism. The story of the boy who cried wolf teaches us that too many warnings about danger can cause people to dismiss real threats. Every day we are inundated with information and statistics highlighting worsening environmental issues. The vast amount of data and models present a grim outlook for our future. While this information is essential for educating and informing the public, it can also be counterproductive. We often become desensitized to the seriousness of these warnings due to their sheer volume and diversity. Additionally, as we witness extreme weather events on the news, we learn to tolerate them. Since these events do not directly affect our lives, we tend to be passive in their warnings.
Fear of the apocalypse can also force us to make irrational associations far removed from the truth.
In the 1950s, nuclear power was viewed as the future, offering a renewable and clean energy source for the world.
Remember that the chain reaction process in the reactor creates tremendous heat, which scientists have learned how to control.
However, as fears about atomic weapons grew in the 1960s, people's perceptions shifted.
Many began to associate nuclear power plants with bombs, leading to a widespread fear of these facilities as potential disasters waiting to happen. Nobody wanted what they saw as the gateway to the apocalypse in their backyard.
But these emotions overshadowed the statistical truth between the danger of nuclear power as compared with fossil fuel sources. Since the 1950s, there have been hundreds of thousands of fatalities directly linked to coal and oil production, such as the Lucental mine disaster in 1962, which took the lives of 299 miners. In contrast, there have been less than 250 casualties linked to nuclear power plants over their entire history worldwide, including the 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima accidents. Yet, we still see nuclear power as a dangerous source of energy.
As a result, the promise of atomic energy has diminished over time.
Henry struggled to finish that last sip of coffee or read that final chapter in a book because of his fear of the end. But he realized that it affected him much more than just that. For years, it had blurred his logic, clouded his memory, twisted his moral sense, and influenced every decision he made. It was hard for Henry to imagine what kind of person he would have been if this fear of the apocalypse had never taken hold. What sort of life could he have led? But this affliction made him who he was, and he couldn't hide from that.
The world could come to an end. This is an abstract possibility that humanity has always confronted. However, the 20th and 21st centuries have brought about heightened anxieties and fears from both secular and religious viewpoints. These concerns are intensified by the concrete threats that could lead to our annihilation. And this cloud of fear and anxiety has crept into the contemporary culture, often blackening our view of the future.
The 20th and now the 21st century have witnessed a surge in these predictions compared to other time periods in history. In a 2022 Pew Research Center survey, 39% of U.S. adults polled believed they were living in the end times.
And this is just not a passing phase. Preparing for the apocalypse is a million-dollar business that has flourished, specifically in America, over the past 40 years. Those driven by the fear of Armageddon gather bottled water and store supplies of canned food. We see a rise in extremists forming militias, arming themselves and their families to the teeth, and readying themselves for social collapse. Missile silos that were once used to house nuclear ICBMs can now be purchased by the ultra-rich, so they may have their own luxury bunker when the world falls apart. We can also see this anxiety in the art and the culture that we create. Over the past century, there have been an increasing number of references to the apocalypse in our films, literature, and music. It can almost be said that worrying about the world's end has become our new national pastime.
Outside of religious beliefs, we see shifting reasons why people fear the end. In the 1980s, it was nuclear war. In the 1990s, the environment became a significant focus. In recent years, it's been disease and the fear of AI.
Possibly the greatest metaphor created out of the fear of nuclear annihilation was the creation of the doomsday clock in 1947 by Robert Oppenheimer and maintained by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. When first created, the hands were set to 7 minutes to midnight, with midnight representing a hypothetical global catastrophe. Since then, because of the expansion of nuclear arms, and now with the environmental crisis and the rise of artificial intelligence, we are at just 90 seconds to midnight.
While these are real threats, other factors may influence our emotions. Over the last 2 centuries, technology has significantly increased, leading to major changes in human life and rapid social transformations. We now live longer than any previous generation, but can also destroy the planet. While we can circumnavigate the globe in several hours via air travel, this ease can also facilitate the spread of diseases. These drastic differences can lead to feelings of anxiety, as we often feel powerless in this fast-changing world. Another aspect is that contemporary life in the Western world has been about living safer lives and eliminating the risks so there are no threats. Of course, this is impossible, and this tension only increases our fear.
The fear over the end of the world can be crippling and damaging, but it can also serve as a catalyst for change. It has the power to awaken us, drive us to take action, and lead to incredibly positive outcomes. For instance, the anxiety surrounding nuclear war prompted protest worldwide in the early 1980s, including a massive anti-war nuclear march in New York City in 1982. By 1983, 81% of Americans supported a freeze on nuclear weapons production.
This fear surrounding nuclear warfare eventually affected the president. After watching the 1983 television film The Day After, Reagan was deeply troubled for days. He had never fully envisioned the consequences of such warfare and how the policies he was advocating could lead to catastrophic outcomes. As a result, he made a significant shift in his second term, actively pursuing drastic arms reduction negotiations with the Soviets. Since that time, the number of nuclear weapons has been reduced by 80%.
It is primarily our fear of extinction that has motivated society to change its ways and address environmental issues. While we may face an uphill battle, it's important to remember that the models, forecasts, and scenarios on the fate of the environment, like all predictions, are not written in stone. Things may get better, but they may also get worse. And there are 1,000 different perspectives, arguments, and opinions on all of this. But it's hopeful to look at how humanity came together to tackle the hole in the ozone. In 1987, countries worldwide signed the Montreal Protocol, which reduced the volume of ozone-depleting gases being released into the atmosphere. The hole is now shrinking and could fully repair itself by 2050. We still have control over our future. It's up to us to make the changes.
But we can't be naive in ignoring these warnings of the environment. It is still a real threat to humanity. The same can be said about the nuclear weapons issue. We like to think that the nuclear problem was solved with the end of the Cold War, but that is simply not the case. Those weapons still sit silently in silos waiting to be used. Furthermore, new weapons are being developed by unstable governments, posing potential threats to global security. So we must forever stay vigilant.
Disaster and tragedy is never going to elude the human story. In 2020, the COVID-19 virus spread across the globe, forcing the world into social isolation to fight the pandemic. In its wake, over 7 million people died worldwide. For many, this was a wake-up call to the fragility of our lives and how the end of the world might be right over the horizon. But it's important to know that humanity has been put through these extreme tests before and survived. The outbreak of the Spanish flu in 1918 saw over 39 million people die worldwide. For people at the time, the sense of the apocalypse was even further heightened by the 16.5 million people who perished because of the First World War, which was still happening when the virus struck. Yet humanity is resilient. That generation recovered like we have recovered from the coronavirus. Outbreaks like this will no doubt happen again, but we will continue to learn and prepare for them.
So what do we do with all this fear and anxiety? How do we move forward when it feels like the world is collapsing around us? We each have to find out how not to let the weight of humanity rest on our shoulders. Not to let the shadow of the world's problems darken the light of our life. Don't focus on the large and look at the small. Step back from the endless news and information cycle we're all fed. It's nearly impossible to tell if the world has gotten worse or if the media is relentlessly telling us it is. At the same time, don't be passive. Get out there and protest governments and big corporations that threaten our future. It is important to accept that there are many things we can't control. But it's also a mistake to think we should just sit here and let the world roll over on us.
Another strategy is to embrace this fear of the end. Look it in the face. Let it scare you to the core, then laugh at it. Art is a great way to exercise these demons. We collectively deal with this social fear by creating and exploring through paintings, books, songs, and films about Armageddon. They let us know we are not alone in this dread.
Films or books about the apocalypse help regulate how we would handle similar fears in the real world. More often than not, they are tales of survival. They tell us how we can surmount catastrophe. And there is something energizing about walking out of a movie theater after seeing the world destroyed, and it's all still there.
There may be another reason we think about all of this so much. Each of us, from a certain perspective, will experience the end of the world, or at least the end of our own world. Our death is an apocalypse of sorts, and by thinking of all of humanity ending, this in some way helps us consider the conclusion to our own story.
Henry has continued to hear the cries of the world coming to an end. Mayan calendars in 2012, the Large Hadron Collider creating a black hole in the Earth, the rise of artificial intelligence. Of all Henry's hours poring over countless books and articles, he ultimately discovered only one tangible truth. There may be no end to his and society's fear of the end. Not only will the predictions of the apocalypse change and morph with each generation, but so will the fear. As soon as we conquer one real or existential threat, another one is sure to pop up in its place. This anxiety is intertwined with our existence, a relentless and never-ending cycle. In many ways, it's like doing the laundry. We wear our clothes, they get dirty, so we wash and scrub them to remove stains and marks, making them clean as new. Yet, without fail, we wear them out into the world again, and the entire process starts anew. This is the reality that Henry has learned to live with. Because nobody likes doing the laundry, but that's life. But then again,